Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and lighting's a little different, sound's going to be a little different. I've moved my studio to a different room, one where I feel like it's going to be a little bit better, but it's going to take some getting used to, so I apologize if maybe the lighting, the audio, things like that are a little different than you guys are used to. But let's go ahead and get this started. So today I want to chat with you guys about why training stress or training stimulus or your training in general needs to be planned. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this because, training is an adaptation in the body. It's a pretty simple adaptation. And what you oftentimes hear is the term SAID, which is specific adaptations to imposed demands. So what does that mean? Well, that means that your body is going to adapt and respond to exactly what you tell it to do. Like, a lot of people have this idea that training in some way is random and unpredictable. It's not. You are, whenever you train, whenever you lift, whenever you exercise, you are putting almost a programming signal into your body of telling it specifically what you want it to do. The only downside to that, the problem we run into, is that when you tell it to do something other than what you thought you just told it to do, right? And that's where it gets confusing, but it will adapt to exactly what you tell it to do. That's why when you train certain joint angles more than others, those joint angles don't get some joint angles get stronger than others because they get trained more. There's only so much carryover to other endeavors when you train for something. But what you need to think about here is the fact that your body adapts to what you tell it to adapt to. And the best analogy I've ever heard that's often done is, I've heard guys like Ripto and other people explain this, and he's not even the first one to come up with this, but he does use it, and I think it's a good analogy. Whenever you go tan in the sun, right, you start out at whatever skin color you start at, and actually people of every ethnicity actually can tan. Not everyone seems to realize that, but that's true. You can get darker with further exposure to the sun. So if you go out and you tan for a certain amount of time, early on, what happens? Well, if you tan for too long, you get a sunburn, right? You get a sunburn, and that's not necessarily conducive to a tan either because it takes longer to heal from. It can be difficult to heal from. It can cause you problems. It can cause problems with recovery. It can be painful. It can be annoying. And eventually, the skin peels and you do start to get darker. But what happens if you go do it more gradually? In other words, let's say you go and you start out and you're exposed at the midday a certain amount of sunlight. The sunlight varies from different times of the day. It varies depending on the time of the year, even in the same place. There's a lot of factors involved that you can't control for. But if you spend 15 minutes in a certain amount of sun, in a few days' time, you will get darker, right? Takes your body some time to adapt, and it changes the structure of the skin cells. It puts more pigment and stuff in there, but that is a physical change to your skin, just like training causes physical changes to muscle, to bone, to tendons, right? A lot of tissues get affected. It is a structural change. But if you keep going repeatedly to the same exposure, what happens? You get less and less and less. So if you go do 15 minutes every other day in the sunlight, right? It's going to reach a certain threshold where you don't get a further adaptation. Now, if you do it more often and do it daily, it will reach a peak quicker. But every single time that you do it, you get less extra darkness out of it. And before long, 15 minutes will not be enough. You'll have to increase it to 20 minutes to get any darker on your tan. Your tan has its own progressive overload, like we think of in the gym. Has its own progressive overload. And if you just go out for random periods of time and you don't time it, you don't think about it, which is how most people are out in the sunlight. I mean, if you're not planning your tan, if you're just going out and just randomly spending time in the sun, with most of your clothes off or whatever you're doing, or shorts or a bikini, you'll get darker, but you don't have any degree of control over it. You can't control its consistency, and you will basically get as dark as your most intense session will stimulate in terms of pigment, and then the additional ones that you do won't make you any darker. In other words, you're going to be as dark as whatever the most intense ones allowed you to do. But if you start reducing your exposure, because again, it's totally random, you're just doing it whatever, not planned, your amount of tan and where it's at and stuff on your body will fade and change over time. And as it gets reduced, it will become less. Well, it's the same with training. It's the same with training. And that's the problem we have with random training. A lot of guys say, oh, you just need to change things up randomly because you adapted. No, you really don't. Yes, you need to increase exposure. You need a larger training stimulus or you will stagnate and in some cases regress, just like with sunlight, right? It's the same idea. It's the same sort of response in the body. If you just go in and pick random things to do, you might be stimulating adaptation, you might not. You might eventually regress. That's the problem with randomness. It needs to be planned. It needs to be planned. You need to have a degree of control over the new stimulation so that you can ensure that you cause your body to adapt further. Because that's what we want to do. We want to go in and make sure that over time you have an actual plan to increase repetitions, to increase weight on the bar, to adjust volume over time so that you can ensure that you're getting a continual increase in progressive overload over time. And that's the problem with people who come in and they claim that they just work out, right? They work out, they don't train. They come in and they do these random exercises, but they might do their sets and reps they have planned, 3 sets of 10, whatever. And sometimes they do random exercises, but you have no degree of control. You don't know if that random exercise you did with that weight and those reps and sets is an increase unless you plotted it and you know that last time you did that exercise, maybe you only do that exercise once every 6 weeks. You need to plot on a chart somewhere that you actually increased what you did on it. Otherwise, it didn't really cause any new training adaptation. And that's not to say the same that assistance work or accessory work done after main lifts done the same don't continue to increase because they're adding extra workload. And if you progressed on one of the other lifts before it, your total workload for those muscles and movement patterns and things have probably increased. But without planning it and tracking it and knowing what you're doing, if you're just throwing random stuff at the body, it's the same as randomly going out in the sunlight for random periods of time with random parts of your body uncovered. You'll get different forms of tan, but you don't have any control over it. Whereas if you gradually go out and increase time and you specifically plan out your sunlight exposure and where it's at on your body and for how long, you can control the tan. Well, it's the same with training. It's the same with training. And when it's planned for, you can ensure in the long term that you don't not only not regress, but you continue to make progress over time. But you also understand that like a tan, with time, you'll get less and less and less no matter what you do. But for the more long-term lifter, you're going to find that if you don't have careful planning, you're going to reach a certain plateau and you're never going to increase. And we do see these people in the gym all the time who, and I don't mean guys like me, they're like, well, you haven't increased lately. I've also been cutting and I'm an advanced lifter in my 40s. Well, I'm talking about people who go to the gym. You see these guys all the time. They use the same weight. They use the same 135 pounds on their bench press and they use the same exact amount of weight on the lat pull down or whatever it is that they're doing day after day, month after month, year after year. And if you've trained long enough, you'll see these people and they go in, they're still using the same silly lightweight. They barely look like they lift and barely look like they train. And they may have been going to your gym for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years. You'll see them all the time. That's what happens when you don't plan progression. You just stagnate and you continue to look like someone who just joined the gym 3 months ago. You see it all the time. See it all the time in terms of their musculature, their strength, everything else. And they never really progress. And a lot of people are happy with that. You'd be surprised. That is the actual average gym goer in most commercial gyms. I've observed it over the years. But because they don't plan anything, they don't have a progression pattern planned out. They're not actually training. They're just going in and working out. They're just going in and working out. And hey, if you enjoy that, there's nothing wrong with that. But by that same token, don't expect yourself to improve in any way either. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.